Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast. Let's preview Martinsville by Richmond Review. We're getting ready for the Martinsville Cup Series race. And one of the things that we really should do is look back at the Richmond race. Before we do that, remember, racefortheprize.com. That's where you can get access to the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet, $30 for the month of April. And we're about to show you a lot of the data and stats that you'll get that'll make it easier for you to build Fantasy NASCAR lineups. Please consider $30, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. Jump on in. And as always, like, subscribe, share the videos. I won't always go as in-depth with a race review, but today I will because Richmond is a short, flat track, and there are correlations with Martinsville. It's not perfect, but generally, drivers that run well at Richmond do tend to run well at Martinsville. Also, this will be a back-to-back week in the new short track package, so it makes sense for us to dive a little deeper into what happened at Richmond. First thing that I will mention, you can see the optimal lineups, the scores on your screen, is pit road. As I mentioned earlier in the week and over, fast pit times will help out a lot at Richmond. It'll be a factor at Martinsville, maybe not quite as significant, but it definitely changes the leads and makes for significant alterations in fantasy lineups. Also, having bad pit days like Christopher Bell or making mistakes in pit road like Austin Dillon, it's going to take out value. It's going to take out possible lap leaders. So pit times, I post them in the spreadsheet, but also you just follow Bozzy on Twitter. That will help you out. We'll start with actual lap times to show how close the field is and maybe also to confirm probably some of your research. So again, all the data is available, racefortheprize.com. You're going to notice that in terms of average speed and lap times, Hamlin, Logano, Larson, Truex, all the drivers that were up front posted very similar times. And for the most part, other than Logano, which we'll jump back into here in a bit, are the drivers that we expected to have speed. For the most part, they had speed at Phoenix. They showed speed in practice if we deciphered between Group A and Group B, which again, we'll talk about later. But again, Christopher Bell to be one of the fastest cars, not a surprise. Josh Berry's going to stand out. We'll get to that in a bit. But Hamlin, Larson, Truex, and then just a tick slower is Chase Elliott. Not a surprise. If we look back at Phoenix, Elliott had a borderline top 5 car, but definitely was a top 10 car, just a tick slower. Same thing could be said of Byron at Phoenix in the new short track package. Really didn't have anything for the Toyotas, but could keep pace with the Toyotas. Same thing at Phoenix for Keselowski and Buescher, although Keselowski and Buescher probably got a little bit of an inflated finish at Phoenix due to strategy. But still, if you read their post-race interviews or listened to the podcast this week, they believe they had top 10 cars at Phoenix, but they didn't quite have anything for the Toyotas. And you can see that in the speed that's carried forward. Maybe a little bit disappointing from Tyler Reddick. Just never could get the track position. But again, right there in that group, and not surprised to see him be a little bit slower than the JGR Toyotas. Maybe expected a little bit more based on last year's stats. But if he would have had track position, it could have been a different story. We did see Bubba Wallace laying down some pretty fast times. And there it is again. Maybe just a tick slower. Also, you can see it's a pretty good run there for Noah Gragson at 23.8. Eric Jones, another Toyota, a little bit slower, but he did have to work through traffic, unlike some of the other Toyotas. He was much deeper in the field, and that's going to be a reason why some of his lap times won't be as good. But for the most part, the cars that were fast were very predictable. It's very good for fantasy NASCAR because we're going to go into Martinsville with our sheet and know who's been fast at Phoenix and Richmond and have the practice data, and it'll be much easier to predict the drivers that are going to lead laps. Also, in a package where passing is not very easy, track position is again going to be something that we're going to want to focus on. Let's jump over to the optimal lineup now. We got Martin Truex Jr., who is in control of the race. Not a big surprise. I mean, maybe you wanted to look at his practice laps and say, well, one of the things you got to remember is the Group A, Group B situation where his lap times aren't going to be the greatest because he's out there on a rubbered up racetrack. As you can see, his times compared to the entire field, not the greatest. But remember, it was a different track in Session B, and you're going to have that same situation here at Martinsville. We've seen that play out at Martinsville in the past couple seasons where Group B is not going to really lay down the best times. Also, you're going to see Group A drivers that might struggle in qualifying because they don't make that quick adjustment. But when you compare him to the rest of the Group B drivers, his speed was fine. Wasn't the greatest, but we know he had a ton of speed at Phoenix. We know he has a lot of experience. He's able to get out of qualifying round one, had track position. It's not like this was some sort of anomaly to see him work his way up there. We go back to our optimal lineup. Kyle Larson, a Group A driver, where you may have been concerned about his speed being kind of inflated. But as I pointed out all week, if a Group A driver were to sustain speed on a long run, which means they're still turning laps as the track has rubbered up slightly, and you throw into it, he has a number one pit stall, and he's starting up front, then that driver's not going to be a concern or a worry. So again, not a surprise to see Larson in the optimal lineup. Christopher Bell has a terrific day. Does everything we expect. Doesn't qualify well. That hurts him. But at the same time, he makes his way through the field really easily, but then suffers a penalty. If we look at his laps, we'll look at his laps in a second. Let's do a quick overview. But Bell possibly could have been a winner. Did everything he was supposed to, other than a mistake on pit road. You can see 16 fast laps. We'll track his laps in a second, but by no means there is any reason to downgrade Christopher Bell. If you adjust for the penalty, he's still probably number one in our hearts and minds. Slightly disappointing day from Denny Hamlin. Gets the win, does a pit road, doesn't score a lot of fantasy points, but the reality is everybody can't score fantasy points. Truex and Larson control most of the race, and that pretty much just locks Hamlin out. That's not to say that Hamlin wasn't good. It's just that Truex and Larson were better. That's going to happen. So if you were on Hamlin and you missed, that's okay. There's no real big reason. Like, one of them was going to get the lead. One of them was going to maintain the lead. It just happened to be Truex and Larson. It wasn't Hamlin, but Hamlin got the win. Logano is a bit of the surprise, but if you're following me on Twitter, as I did more research, I warned up a lot more to Logano. If you look back at past night races at Richmond, Penske had been really good. It was JGR, and you can check my tweet about, you look back at the previous night races, and it's JGR Toyotas, and it's Logano. And Logano was kind of happy heading into this race. He had a decent starting position. I know it seemed like a bit of a leap to go ahead and jump onto Logano, having his season be what it was. But this was the time. Better late than never, and Logano worked. I can't say that I was on him, and I wish I could have predicted this better, but there were reasons to believe that Logano could be competitive. And we talked about in the previous video, when you were constructing your Richmond build, that you could have a third or fourth hog that just scrapes off fast lap points because at Richmond it gets everywhere, or goes everywhere, especially in the top 10 where he ran, and he could get you some place differential and find his way in the optimal lineup, especially 8,400. Josh Berry, probably the biggest surprise getting into the optimal lineup. But hindsight being 2020, we can kind of reverse engineer it. We knew that SHR had been good at Phoenix and at Richmond. We also know that Josh Berry, who almost won the Xfinity race at Richmond last season, he's a late model short track racer. If any track on this circuit really plays into his wheelhouse, it's going to be Richmond and Martinsville. So to see him adapt pretty well, to see the team get a setup really well, that's not a surprise. Now, it is a surprise because it hadn't done it yet, but if it was going to click, that was the place it was going to click. And have a poor qualifying effort, again, going from Group A into the qualifying session, it wasn't a surprise to see him not qualify well. We know, again, going into Martinsville this week, to make this more actionable, that there's going to be A drivers that will be fast, and then they just can't nail that one lap in the qualifying round because the track has changed. No fault of their own, it's just going to hit somebody every single time, and it hit Barry. So you get a bunch of place differential, take advantage early, gets into good track position. And let's look exactly how many laps did he get. Actually, we'll break that down. Either way, that would be the explanation for Barry, and I don't think it's a one-off. This could definitely play again at Martinsville, another track where he is strong, and where Stewart-Haas Racing has been pretty good, even in the Gen 6 car at the end, and even in the next gen car. Brad Keselowski just doing what he's been doing. Top 10 car, not quite ready to compete with Toyota or Hendrick. Tyler Reddick, good day. Maybe just a step behind. William Byron again, as I mentioned before, the Hendricks in this package, other than Larson, who had the pole position. You put Larson in dirty air, I don't know if he has that good of a day. But Byron, top 5 speed. Busher, right there in the top 10. Eric Jones, 5th person in your fantasy NASCAR lineup. He showed speed at times at Phoenix, worked his way through traffic at times, got in that wreck at the end. The Toyota has some speed. Very encouraging. Again, we don't want to overreact to poor qualifying efforts. It's just one lap. He was a very popular play during the week. I believe I kind of shifted away from him after practice. Probably shouldn't have. Should have relied on what this team put together at Phoenix. Lesson learned moving forward. The Toyotas for Legacy Motor Club, other than Nemechek, are pretty solid. They're not 2311, but they're definitely at the top of the mid-pack, bottom of the top pack, however you want to rank them. They are top 20 cars, and that's where he ran. His average running position would have been higher had it not been for poor starting position. Noah Gragson, again, an SHR Ford, running really well. He tested at Richmond last season. That's definitely beneficial to him. Elliott doesn't score any points. Kind of gets a pit road sequencing issue because of when a caution comes out. Some bad restarts, but a good restart at the end saves his race. But again, if you just overall look at the big picture, there's Byron, there's Elliott, but they really don't have much for the Toyotas. Briscoe said this was his worst race of the year, but for him to still finish in the top 20, he was still pretty encouraged. But overall, like, they didn't do well on pit road. He didn't run well in the race. Hopefully it's just a one-off because we are going to a Martinsville racetrack where he has been really strong in the next-gen car. Bubba Wallace, really good day, 23:11, doesn't get to finish because he wrecks at the end, average running position of 6th. And that's why I say if Tyler Reddick would have had better track position, then he possibly could have posted the same results as Bubba Wallace. He didn't. Either way, you come away thinking, yep, 23:11s definitely have some speed. I don't know if I need to break anybody else down right through here. As far as optimals and points go, we'll go through the laps now. Don't really need to talk too much more about Hamlin and Logano and Larson. These drivers all take decent track position and do exactly what they're supposed to do. Chase Elliott, same thing. Christopher Bell, if you really need to see it, look, you can see him clearly driving through the field all the way up to the top 5. Pretty encouraging stuff there. And doing exactly what we expect. Working his way there, making the moves. And then he gets the speeding penalty here, has to work his way through again. But again, he's able to work his way back through the field again, make passes, get back to the front. Very encouraging. It's disappointing if you rostered him, although I thought that probably wasn't going to be the play. It's just very hard to spend that money on Bell and then forfeit taking another hog. Byron, Kozlowski, Busher, really, we don't need to talk much more about that. We know Reddick was what he did. We know what Barry. Now let's see if Barry gained a bunch during the. So you see a lot of guys who make a lot of hay, get a lot of gains when we put on those wet tires. Really help Barry out a lot. Could have been a different story if it wasn't for the wet tire situation for Barry. I don't know. Because ultimately he does get up there and just holds position, and he gets as high as 3rd, but then runs in the top 10. But hey, he's able to run around the top 10 for most of the race. Pretty good. Yeah, he helped get some gains from those wet tires and get out of a hole, but ultimately you have to believe he has a good race car. Anyone else that I want to look at, really? Ty Gibbs got a penalty right here in lap 176, so that's worth mentioning. You might, oh, well, what's wrong with Ty Gibbs? Nothing. He had a top 10 car. It just wasn't going to be his day, but his day was made a lot worse because of the speeding penalty. He works his way back up and is running 12th late in the race. And then we get that late race caution, and he just doesn't have the best restart. And he loses several spots, finishes 16th. So if we were to zoom out and say, Ty Gibbs, with a penalty, finishes 12th at Richmond, yeah, it makes sense. Doesn't mean that he's not fast or he's lost his talent. It's just the situation. Decent day for Bowman, but that's about what we're expecting anymore. Just running from 15th to 20th. We haven't seen any signs at like the traditional regular ovals that he's anything other than that. We've had some oddball events at Bristol and Coda where he has been really good, but if we get a pretty regular Martinsville, place where he has won before, still think he's just a 15th to 20th place driver. We already discussed Briscoe. Blaney's never really been great at this track. Busch struggled with the setup, which has been kind of the norm this year for that car. Gillen started up front, but when all things were said and done, he was about a 20th place race car. Not really a surprise. That's about what we see from Gillen, 20th to 25th, so nothing shocking there. Suarez didn't do much, didn't really expect much. Cindric, this is who he is anymore. Austin Dillon, really liked his car, had some speed, but he had a pit road issue early in the race, had to dig out of it, was a lap down, and that pretty much just kind of jammed him in for most of the race. He did have speed. That is encouraging because he has put together some good Martinsville races in the past. Ryan Preece, a really disappointing day. Expected a lot more from a guy that had tested at this track and with Stewart-Haas Racing Fords being pretty strong. So that's disappointing to me. That's a miss. Ty Dillon ultimately ends up in the optimal lineup just because you have to punt. And that's something that we discussed earlier. Stenhouse, disappointing day. Thought he could run a little bit better. The rest pretty much self-explanatory. Is your consistent reminder that Zane Smith is maybe, although he is a rental driver, he's a trackhouse driver in a color or in a Spire car because Spire has a charter. They throw him in. I don't think there's any resources. It's a new crew chief. He's just out there. He might as well be the new Rick Ware. The Rick Ware cars are better than the situation that Zane Smith is in. I know he's a past champion of the Truck Series, but this is just a pitiful excuse for a ride. Going back to the Ty Dillon situation, Ty Dillon ends up being in it. And so we discussed in the podcast this weekend and throughout the week, if we are going to be forced at Richmond to pay an expensive amount of money for our hogs, then we're going to have to punt and the lineup will not be balanced. It was not balanced in that regard. We got Ty Dillon running in the back. He scores just enough fantasy points, squeezes in, and the optimal lineup is able to fit Truex and Larson. Had Logano or Barry, led a bunch of laps. Lineup would have completely shifted. It did not. We didn't get a balanced lineup. We ended up with a punt. Group A versus Group B, again, worth mentioning. If we look at the drivers, who are the fastest? At Richmond, Martin Truex Jr., Group B. This is a trend that we have seen at Richmond. This is also a trend that is not completely definitive at Martinsville, but it will be the case. And I'm expected to be even more of the case this season with a softer tire used at Martinsville. It's going to lay down rubber a lot quicker, especially during practice. A lot of that will come down to the weather in Martinsville, which I believe is going to be halfway decent. We'll see. I'm not a weatherman. But you could see a significant track change in practice and also in the race. This will benefit Group B, has in the past. So Truex benefits. You're going to point to Larson and say, well, he led a bunch of laps. He wasn't Group B. But again, he did have long run speed. So he had an idea of kind of what the car was going to do as it rubbered up a little bit. But he also was on pole position with the number one pit stall. That's an exception that obviously can be made. Christopher Bell, Group B. Denny Hamlin, Group B. Logano, top 10 car. Wasn't the fastest. He was there. He had track position. We've already explained why he could run well. Same thing with Barry. Here you go, B, B, B. And then you could be slightly disappointed by Buescher after really running away with the race. Maybe the fact that he didn't get that Group B session. Another thing worth mentioning, which didn't really matter in the end, Daniel Suarez and Ross Chastain and I believe Chase Briscoe, they delayed their practice times. They didn't go out until 5 minutes into Group A to try to get a better idea of the track. So their practice times did not look good. If we pull that up on the screen. So Chastain looked like a slug, but that's because he went out 5 minutes into Group A and So if you go out into a fresh track on Group A, you can go blazing fast like Kyle Larson. You go out 5 minutes later, as it's rubbered up more, your lap times just aren't going to be comparable. They wanted to get a better read. It really just didn't help them at all. Wasn't enough. Suarez did it. Briscoe did it. Something to look at. You can access that data in the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet at racefortheprize.com and see when these drivers are out on track so that you can get a better understanding. I saw a lot of people tweeting, why don't they all just run at one session? We can't compare data. Well, maybe you can't compare data. Maybe you're going to be confused. But I have enough data that makes it somewhat manageable. Not perfect, but we can get a little bit better understanding. We can read between the lines, maybe get a little bit of an edge. So we've discussed Group A and B. We've looked at the optimal lineup from Richmond. Those are all pretty much the same drivers I expect to be pretty good at Phoenix. Same targets, or at Martinsville. Last thing we'll see, Chase Elliott mentions about the racetrack. Like this car, top 10 car. And quoting him, he says, everybody was just the same. We would run around there and just kind of run the same pace. Felt like we kind of found a little pace there the last two runs, and we were able to actually pass a couple cars into green. Byron echoed that sentiment, which is encouraging, and it's something to look at going into Martinsville. You've got Elliott and Byron saying, we kind of found some speed there at the end. We know Larson had speed as well. So the gap between Toyota and Hendrick may not exist heading into Martinsville. And this is a big Martinsville race. This is their 40th anniversary of them getting that win that saved the operation. Brad Keselowski post-race interview said something similar to what he said at Phoenix, in that we've got a top 10 car. We just don't have a race winning car at the moment. And that's what we're seeing. It's good. RFK looks pretty good, but they're not right on Hendrick's level or on the JGR Toyota level. Can they break through at Martinsville? I would say probably not. Martinsville is a Toyota place for JGR. Martinsville is a Hendrick place. And I would expect more of the same from Keselowski and Busch, top 10 cars. Probably don't quite have enough to go into victory lane, but never say never. That'll do it for this one. Remember, racefortheprize.com. That's where you can get access to the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet. $30. Just Venmo, PayPal, Cash App some money over to me. I'll save the sheet with you. Please make sure you're liking the videos. Really appreciate it. Really helps out with the algo. Do a bunch of videos, try to get people in, try to sell some April sheets. Subscribe. Get a lot of views. A lot of you aren't subscribed yet. Come on. Throw that thing into your feed. It's pretty cool. Appreciate it. Leave comments. I'll respond to all the comments. Very blessed to have you guys around. I love you guys. Trip to life, fantastic.